Today I'm going to show you the 5 Davinci Resolve project settings that I change every time I edit a video. And before you ask, yes, this is a real members only jacket. Let's take a look. When I first started editing videos, I never really paid attention to project settings. I might have changed the frame rate in a project, but other than that, I would just kind of dump my footage in and get to work. And that's a shame because there are, especially in Davinci Resolve, some project settings that can really help you out, really change the game for you as an editor. So today, I'm gonna show you the 5 things that I do every time I set up a new Davinci Resolve project. The first 2 are kind of easy gimmies, really kind of boring to be honest, but the next 3 are total game changers. So without further ado, let's dive into Davinci Resolve and get started. The first thing that I look at whenever I start a new project is the resolution. Now for client work, stuff outside of YouTube, I'm typically working in a standard 1080p timeline or sometimes 4K. But for YouTube videos, I actually change my resolution so I have a 2:1 ratio because it takes up more screen real estate on mobile devices. It won't give you those ugly black bars on either side of your screen. So, you're welcome, but it's really easy to change that actually. So first thing we need to do is go into our project settings. There's a couple different ways we can do that. We can either go to File, Project Settings, or we can go down to this little gear in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And then in Master Settings right here, you'll find Timeline Resolution. I got it set up as 1920 by 1080. For 1920 by 1080, what I want to do is change this to 1920 by 960. The next thing we're going to look at is our frame rate. Now I shoot basically everything in 23.976 frames per second or 24 frames per second for simplicity, and I want everything in my project to reflect that. So the first thing that I'm going to do, same thing in those master settings, in the timeline format, I'm going to change my timeline frame rate to 23.976. I'm going to change my playback frame rate to 23.976. And down in video monitoring, I'm going to change my video format to 1080 PSF 23.976. And those are the first 2 project settings that I changed. Like I said, super easy, kind of boring, super simple. The next 3, this is where you want to pay attention. Next, we're going to work on some color settings. So let's come down into our general options and we're going to go into the color section. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check the luminance mixer defaults to 0. Go ahead and save that and actually bring in a video clip. Then I'm going to create a timeline from that video clip. Change my audio track type to mono and create. Let's come over here into the edit page. I'm going to trim this up just a little bit and bring this back to the beginning of the timeline. Make sure that clip is selected and let's head over to the color page. Now down in the bottom left-hand corner of your color page, you're going to find your color wheels. Right now I have it set to primaries bars. Down in the bottom right of your color wheels section, you're gonna find your Luma mix. And right now it's set to 0. I wanna show you exactly what this does. So first I'm going to bring this all the way up to 100. I'm gonna come over to my scopes and I'm going to click on Parade. And you'll see this is a fairly well-balanced image, but let's say I wanted to take some red out of the highlights. If I came over to my primaries bars and I started bringing that red down, if you look at the scopes, you'll see that the green and the blue are actually raising up as I bring the red down. We don't want that. So let's go ahead, reset this node grade. We're gonna bring our Luma mix back down to 0. And now if I start taking some red out of the highlights, you'll see that the green and blue are stationary. They don't move. What that Luma mix does by bringing it down to 0, it allows your red, your green, and your blue channels to act independently from each other, which is really going to help you dial in your color correction when you're color correcting. Now, some people don't like that. Some people would rather have everything kind of work with each other and get your balance that way. I don't personally. I find it a lot easier to do it this way. And if you're a beginner, you might want to try it this way too. Like I said, it makes it super easy to color correct your footage. The next setting that we're going to look at is our contrast. Now, typically Davinci Resolve by default uses an S curve when you apply contrast to your image. If you're not working in your curves and you're just using the contrast section, it applies an S curve, and that's okay. Davinci Resolve's trying to help you out. I'll give them props for that, but there's a couple problems with that. Let's take a look at that real quick. So here we are in the color page again. I'm gonna change my scopes over to the waveform. Now, if I come over here to my color wheel section and I click on contrast and I start dragging it to the right, it's adding contrast on an S curve, which means the highlights and the shadows are staying exactly where they are, and it's just basically building contrast off the midtones, which is causing some issues, to say the least. We're getting a lot of weird artifacting and just a weird looking image, and also our shadows and our highlights are both being clipped down at the bottom, which means we're losing a lot of detail. Let's go ahead and reset our contrast. We're actually gonna reset this entire node grade. Now let's go back into our project settings. We're gonna be in general options again, in that color section again, and we're going to uncheck use S curve for contrast. Go ahead and click save. Now, once again, we're gonna click and drag on contrast, and you'll see that we're no longer clipping in the blacks and the whites. The blacks and the whites are just being raised, which means we have a lot more control over our contrast. We can pull it a lot farther before our image starts looking really weird. And this way, if there's a part of your image that you want to have, you know, lower than 0, if you really want to, because you're trying to get something else darker and something else has to go below 0 for that, you can do that without your image looking too weird. And I really like this. It gives me a lot more control if I'm adding contrast. I use this especially at the beginning of my color grade because I typically bring my contrast down so I can redo it the way that I want. The fifth thing that I do every time I start a new project in Davinci Resolve is change my color space to the Aces color space. Now, I just did a whole video on this last week, so if you want to learn more about how to do that and how to work in Aces, you can check out this video right here. And if you found this useful and you want more videos about how to make better videos, then make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next video. Go watch it now.